couldn't hear me. My mic was pulled up. Anyways, so we left last. Oh my god, we last left off of the coding challenge, and now for some reason I finished this box model first. Okay, so this time we're going to work on display and positioning. Alright. And so, flow of the HTML. A browser will render the elements of an HTML document that has no CSS from left to right, top to bottom, in the same order as they exist in the document. This is called the flow of elements in HTML. In addition to the properties that it provides to style HTML elements, CSS includes properties that change how a browser positions elements. These properties specify where an element is located on a page, if the element can share lines with other elements, and other related attributes. These properties specify where an element is located on a page, if the element can share lines with other elements, and other related attributes. Okay. In this lesson, you will learn 5 properties for adjusting the position of HTML elements in the browser. Position, display, z-index, float, clear. Each of these properties will allow us to position and view elements on a web page. They can be used in conjunction with any other styling properties you may know. Okay. Nothing to do here. Position. Take a look at the block level elements in the image below. Block level elements, like these boxes, create a block. They fall with their parent elements, and they prevent other elements from appearing in the same horizontal space. Notice the block level elements in the image above take up their own line of space, and therefore don't overlap each other. In the browser to the right, you can see block level elements also consistently appear on the left side of the browser. This is the default position for block level elements. The default position of an element can be changed by setting its position property. The position property can take one of 5 values. Static, the default value. It does not need to be specified. Relative, absolute, fixed, sticky. In the next few exercises, you will learn about the values in the list above. For now, it's important to understand that if you favor the default position of an HTML element, you don't need to set its position property. Okay, so what we do here is style.css, add a declaration to the question rule set that sets the position to static. The question rule set to position it to static. Notice that setting position to static does nothing. That's because static simply refers to the default behavior. So we're supposed to do nothing to question. No. Doesn't do not anything. So the position is relative. Okay, We're now looking at when the position is set to relative. One way to modify the default position of an element is by setting its position property to relative. I think using this is outdated though, but it's good to know what this is about. The value allows you to position an element relative to its default static position on the web page. To the default static position on the web page. So then what's the difference between relative and static? Although the code in the example above instructs the browser to expect a relative positioning of the green box element, it does not specify where the green box element should be positioned on the page. This is done by accompanying the position declaration with one or more of the following offset properties that will move the element away from its default static position. Top moves the element down from the top. Bottom moves the element up from the bottom. Left moves the element away from the left side to the right. Right moves the element away from the right side to the left. Why is it doing it to like the opposite? Moves the element down from the top. This is done by accompanying a position declaration with one or more of the following offset properties that will move the element away from its default static position. Away. You can specify values in pixels, ems, or percentages, among others, to dial in exactly how far you need the element to move. It's also important to note that offset properties will not work if the element's position property is the default static. You can specify values in pixels, ems, or percentages, among others, to dial in exactly how far you need the element to move. It's also important to note that offset properties will not work if the element's position property is the default static. In the example above, the element of green box classes will move down 50 pixels. Okay, so you have to use this relative declaration with the offset properties. So we specified top and left, and so it moved away from the top and left by its specified value. Will be moved down 50 pixels and to the right 120 pixels from its default static position. The image below displays the new position of the box. Offsetting the relative elements will not affect the positioning of other elements. So in the style.css inside the dot question rules, I change the position property to relative. Inside the question rules, I change it to relative questions. Alright. And now, what does that do to all the questions? Nothing really changed though, right? Because we didn't set any offset. Offset dot question 40 pixels from the top. Alright. Now we are offsetting from the top. Oh. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Alright, we did it, and it doesn't look like it changed. but we passed. Now for absolute. Another way of modifying the position of an element is by setting its position to absolute. When an element's position is set to absolute, all other elements on the page will ignore the element and act like it is not present on the page. The element will be positioned relative to its closest positioned parent element, while offset properties can be used to determine the final position from there. Take a look at the image below. Another way of modifying the position of an element is by setting. When an element position is set to absolute, all other elements on the page will ignore the element and act like it's not present on the page. The element will be positioned relative. Okay, excuse me. Element will be positioned relative to its closest position parent element, while offset properties can be used to determine the final position from there. Take a look at the image below. The website building in progress. Please come back later. And so this thing, it says please come back. The website building is in progress. Please come back later. Text is displaced from its static position at the top left corner of its parent container. It has offset property declarations of top and right, positioning it 300 pixels down and 0 pixels from the right. So this is absolute. Absolute from what? To its from its parent element, the closest parent element. I thought it was a whole page, but it's just a parent element. So in styles.css, set the position inside of the header rule set. The header rule set. To absolute. Notice how now it's removed from the normal flow of the document. And covering the welcome section. So which part is the header anyways? The header is all these questions is a header. It's removed from the normal flow of the document. So this thing ignores, it's just ignored, separated from the rest of the flow, and so it's like it's not seeing it there. Okay, so when you change the position to absolute, you may have noticed that the header shrunk horizontally. We'll learn why in a later exercise. For now, set the width property of the header to 100%. It's going to cover everything. 100%. Right. So now it's on fixed. So what happens when it is fixed? When an element's position is set to absolute, as in the last exercise, the element will scroll with the rest of the document when a user scrolls. We can fix an element to a specific position. We can fix an element to a specific position on the page regardless of user scrolling by setting its position to fixed and accompanying it with the familiar offset properties. top, bottom, left, and right. So in the example above, the title element will remain fixed to its position no matter, this thing, no matter where the user scrolls on the page, like in the image below. Okay, so this bar. Okay, so that's what you usually do with the nav bar and stuff like that. This technique is often used for navigation bars on a web page. In style.css, change the position property inside of the header rule to fixed. Scroll up and down the web page. What do you notice? Inside the curly braces of the header selector rule set, the position property should have a value of fixed. Change the position property inside of the header. Oh no. Oh no. Let me try to get this problem with this charger first before the stream stops. Alright, and I'm back. Okay, so it's changed. Oh, I didn't change it to fix yet. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's not what I want. I want it to be fixed. Alright, so now let's see. It does. Whoa, it's so. Wait a minute. Why is only see-through for the rest of the bottom one, not the top? Okay, cool. So inside the braces of the header selector rule set, the position property should have a value of fixed. Notice that part of the welcome section is now covered up by the header. That's because when we changed the position of the header to fixed, we removed it from the flow of the HTML document. Let's fix that. Set the position of the welcome element to be relative. That changed, but now the questions. Whoa. Relative. So what did that do? Notice that part of the welcome section is now covered by the header. That's because when we changed the position of the header to fixed, we removed it from the flow of the HTML document. Let's fix that. So we changed it to relative. Offset the welcome section by 200 pixels from the top. Everything might not be displaying correctly just yet. We'll fix it in a later exercise. Offset the welcome section by 200 pixels from the top. Everything. Okay, that. So what did that do? That made it relative to the fixed piece up there. Position. Now we get to use sticky. Since static and relative positioned elements stay in the normal flow of the document. Since static and relative positioned elements stay in the normal flow of the document. When a user scrolls the page or a parent element, these elements will scroll too. And since fixed and absolute positioned elements are removed from the document flow, when a user scrolls, these elements will stay at their specified offset position. Since static and relative positioned elements stay in the normal flow of the document, static and relative positioned elements stay in the normal. When a user scrolls a page or parent element, these elements will scroll too. And since fixed and absolute position elements are removed from the document flow when a user scrolls, these elements will stay at their specified offset position. The sticky value is another position value that keeps an element in the document flow as the user scrolls. The sticky value is another position value that keeps an element in the document flow as the user scrolls, but sticks to a specified position as the page is scrolled further. But sticks to a specified position as the page is scrolled further. This is done by using the sticky value along with the familiar offset properties, as well as one new one. Is another position value that keeps an element in the document flow as a user scroll, but sticks to a specified position as the page is scrolled further. This is done by using the sticky value along with familiar offset properties as well as one new one. And the example above, the dot box bottom div will remain in its relative position and scroll as usual. When it reaches 240 pixels from the top, it will stick to that position until it reaches the bottom of its parent container, where it will unstick and rejoin the flow of the document. It will stick to that position until it reaches the bottom of the parent container, where it will unstick and rejoin the flow of the document. It will stick to the position until it reaches the bottom of the parent container, where it will unstick and rejoin the flow. Okay, so so change the position of the elements with with the class question to sticky. Change with the class question to sticky. Inside the curly braces, property should show the value of sticky. Did you change the position of that question selector to sticky? Did I not do that? The position of that question to sticky. Oh, it's because I already have one here and it did not override it. Wow. So I guess there's an error. It sticks with the first specified one. Let's see if that changed anything. But now we can't see this. It's not sticky. Wait a minute, why is it like that? Oh, it's kind of simulating some flashcard thing. And what? The only thing that's being sticky. Oh, they're saying the questions. They want the question to be sticky. That's weird. Display and positioning. Z index. When boxes on a web page have a combination of different positions, the boxes and therefore their content can overlap with each other, making the content difficult to read or consume. When boxes on a web page have a combination of different positions, the boxes and therefore their content can overlap with each other, making the content difficult to read or consume. When boxes on a web page have a combination of different positions, when boxes on a web page have a combination of different positions, the boxes and therefore their content can overlap with each other, making the content difficult to read or consume. In the example above, the green box element overlaps on top of the blue box element. The z-index property controls how far back on how far forward an element should appear on the web page before on a web page when elements overlap. This can be thought of as the depth of elements, with deeper elements appearing behind shallower elements. The z-index property accepts integer values. Depending on their values, the integer instructs the browser on the order in which elements should be layered on the web page. To relative and z-index to 1. We change position to relative because the z-index property does not work on static elements. That's very important. I'm going to say that again. We change position to relative because of the z-index property that does not work on static. It's so important, I'm going to copy this line and paste it into the chat. Wait, did it show up? Okay. Because the z-index property does not work on static elements, we change position to relative because the z-index property does not work on static elements. The z-index of 1 moves the .blue box element forward because the z-index value does not explicitly specify has not been explicitly specified for the .green box element, which means it has a default z-index of value of 0. Take a look at the image below. They're both relative. This one is 1. Wait, this one has no z-index. The z-index of 1 moves the .blue element forward because of the z-index value has not been explicitly specified for the green box element, which means it has a default index value of 0. How does it move forward? So what does that mean? The green box is like this big, or what? So what are they having us do? The z-index of the header to 10. What is the header again? This is the header. No, this is the header. Let's look at what the header is. All the questions is the header. Okay, and if we put that to... Oh, they want it to be 10. That's on top. That is on top. Yep. And is it relative? No, it's fixed. This looks good. Okay, and what if without it? What was it like? Same thing. It didn't change much. Wait a minute. Okay, so when we added this, okay, before it was on the bottom, but now it's on top. Okay. Inline display. Inline display. Every HTML element has a default display value that indicates if it can share horizontal space with other elements. Some elements fill the entire browser from left to right regardless of the size of their content. Other elements only take up as much horizontal space as their content requires and can be directly next to other elements. Okay, so on the element, I have to read this again. Every HTML element has a default display value that dictates if it can share horizontal space. Horizontal space with other elements. Some elements fill the entire browser from left to right regardless of the size of their content. Other elements only take up as much horizontal space as their content requires and can be directly next to other elements. In this lesson, we'll cover 3 values for the display property. Yeah, they were talking about this, and it was weird that they only covered it in a later module. But yay, we're finally going over it. And you're going to discuss the difference between inline and both inline block. So the default display for some elements such as EM, strong, and A is called inline. The display for some elements, M, strong, and A is called inline. I want to be done with this already. Let's see how many more I have to go through. Almost there. And then we'll take a quiz. Inline elements have a box that wraps tightly around their content, only taking up the amount of space necessary to display their content and not requiring a new line after each element. The height and width of these elements cannot be specified in the CSS document. For example, the text of an anchor tag will by default be displayed on same line as surrounding text, and it will only be as wide as necessary to contain its content. Inline elements cannot be altered in size with the height or width CSS properties. The default display for some elements, such as EM, strong, and A, is called inline. Inline elements have a box that wraps tightly around their content, only taking up the amount of space necessary to display their content, and not requiring a new line after each element. And the height and width of these elements cannot be specified in the CSS documents. To learn more about inline elements, read MDN documentation. In the example above, the EM element is inline because it displays its content on the same line as the content surrounding it, including the anchor tag. This example will display. To learn more about inline elements, read. So this is what it will look like. So the EM italicizes it. The CSS Display Properties provides the ability to make any element an inline element. This includes elements that are not inline by default, such as paragraphs, divs, and headings. The CSS Display Properties provides the ability to make any element an inline element. This includes elements that are not inline by default, such as paragraphs, divs, and headings. Okay. The CSS in the example above will change the display of all h1 elements to inline. The browser will render h1 elements on the same line as the other inline elements immediately, before or after them if there are any. The CSS in the example above will change the display of all h1 elements to inline. The browser will render h1 elements on the same line as other inline elements immediately. So here we're going to use the opening and closing strong tags around the word welcome. Notice that the element does not move. That's because strong elements are inline, so they can share lines with other elements. Welcome. It doesn't move because it's an inline. Alright. It's an inline tag, so it doesn't move. Display block. Some elements are not displayed in the same line as the content around them. Some elements are not displayed in the same line as the content around them. These are called block level elements. These elements fill the entire width of the page by default, but their width property can also be set. So block are not displayed in the same line. Okay, so block is the opposite of inline. These are called block level elements. These elements fill the entire width of the page by default, but their width property can also be set. Unless otherwise specified, they are the height necessary to accommodate their content. Unless otherwise specified, they are the height necessary to accommodate their content. Elements that are block level by default include all levels of heading elements h1 through h6, pdiv, and footer. For a complete list of block elements, visit the MDN documentation. In the example above, all strong elements will be displayed on their own line with no content directly on either side of them, even though their contents may not fill the width of most computer screens. In index.html, add a footer element at the bottom of the document, right above the closing body tag. So they want a footer. And then what we put on the inside. Nothing changed. That's because the footer element is empty. Add an h3 element inside of the footer that says thanks for taking our survey. I'm not paying attention to the spacing. Let's see what changed. To improve the appearance of the web page, set the height of the footer to 100 pixels in styles.css. Do we already have a footer? Okay, here. Let's see how that changes. Did that change? Nothing changed. It still looks bad. But why is it working? Anyways. Display inline block. The third value for the display property is inline block. Inline block displays combines features of both inline and block. Oh, it's a mix of inline and block. Wait a minute. What was it called before? It was just block. Oh my gosh. It's both inline and block. Why did I not notice that? Inline block display combines features of both inline and block elements. Inline block elements can appear next to each other, and we can specify their dimensions using the width and height properties. Images are the best examples of default inline block elements. Images are the best example of default inline block elements. Images are the best example of default inline block element. Images are the best example of default inline block elements. Inline inline block elements can appear next to each other, and we can specify their dimensions using the width and height properties. Okay, so without the inline block, we cannot specify the width and height properties. Images are the best example of default inline block elements. Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Images. For example, the divs below will be displayed on the same line and with the width and the specified dimensions. I'm a rectangle, so am I. Me 3! And say they put all of these same classes with a display inline block. There are 3 rectangular divs that each contains a paragraph of text. There are 3 rectangular divs that each contain a paragraph of text. The dot rectangle divs will all appear inline provided there is enough space from left to right with a width of 200 and height of 300 pixels, even though the text inside of them may not require 200 pixels by 300 pixels of space. Let's fix the display of the list elements in the menu at the top of the page. Let's fix the display of the list elements Let's fix the display of the list elements in the menu at the top of the page. Set the display property of li elements to inline block. Let's fix the display of the list elements in the menu. Set the inline display property of li elements to inline block. Okay, so where is that of the li? Okay, so there's going to be a display property of inline block. Inside the curly braces of the li selector, rule set the display property should have a value of inline block. Set the width of the li elements to 80 pixels. Oh, it's being respectful of the width that is set. And now we can reduce the top offset of the welcome section. Set it to 50 pixels. Of the welcome section. So, do we target the welcome selector? Okay, the top is... Oh, we have a top right here already, so just make that 50 pixels. Oh. Now set the display property of .answer. Where is the answer supposed to be? Display. Okay, so inline block can also be used on stuff like multiple choice. It reduces the amount of space taken up as well. Oh, it wraps around. Should have a value of inline block. Oh! So now float. So far you've learned how to specify the exact position of an element using offset properties. If you're simply interested in moving an element as far left or as far right as possible in the container, you can use the float property. So far, you've learned how to specify the exact position of an element using offset properties. If you're simply interested in moving an element as far left or as far right as possible in the container, you can use a float property. Oh, it was the float property that was outdated. And instead of using float, we now use flex, but this is also good to know. The float property is commonly used for wrapping text around an image. Note, however, that moving elements left or right for layout purposes is better suited for tools like CSS Grid and Flexbox. Which you'll learn about later on. Oh, so float property is commonly used for wrapping text around an image. The float property is often set. That's a good one. This is a good fact. I wanna copy this and paste it into the chat. The float property is often set using one of the values below. Left moves or floats elements as far left as possible. Right moves elements as far right as possible. In the green section with 50% height, 150 pixels. That orange section. Okay, so we have these rule sets here. In the example above, we float the .orange section element to the right. This works for the static and relative position elements. See the result of the code below. Floated elements must have a width specified, as in the example above. Otherwise, the element will assume the full width of its containing element, and changing the float value will not yield any visible result. This is another important rule. I'm going to have to paste this into the chat. Oh my god, floats are difficult. There's a lot of rules. So one of the rules is what? That you have to have a width specified. Otherwise, the element will assume the full width of its containing element, and changing the float value will not yield any visible result. The float value? What is the float value? Is that like... Oh, they're talking about the value as in this value. Right. Okay. So add a declaration to the dot answer. The dot answer. Dot answer! Oh, float, float, float. To left, and let's see what that does. Oh my god. Why did they have us do that? Oh my god. Oh my gosh. Why? This can't be right. Why did they... Why? This is becoming a mess. Display and positioning. Clear. The float property can also be used to float multiple elements at once. However, when multiple floated elements have different heights, It can affect their layout on the page. Specifically, elements can bump into each other and not allow other elements to properly move to the element or right. Specifically, elements can bump into each other and not allow other elements to properly move to the left or right. The clear property specifies how elements should behave when they bump into each other on the page. It can take on one of the following values. The float property can also be used to float multiple elements at once. However, when multiple floated elements have different heights, it can affect their layout on a page. Specifically, elements can bump into each other and not allow elements to properly move to the left or right. The clear property specifies how elements should behave when they bump into each other on the page. It can take on one of the following values. Left. The left side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. The left side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. The right side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. Neither side of the element will touch any other element within the same containing element. None. The element can touch either side. In the example above, all divs on the page are floated to the left side. The element with class special did not move all the way to the left because a taller div blocked its positioning. By setting its clear property to left, the special div will be moved all the way to the left side of the page. Take a look at the dot answered divs on the web page. Take a look at the dot answer divs on the web page. The dot answer. These are the dot answers. They have been floated to the left, but have they been floated to the left? The dot answer. Oh yes, we did float it to the left. Did I do that, or did they do that? But the dot questions divs are touching the answer divs on the right. What did they say about the left? The left side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. Yeah. In the question selector, set the clear property to left. Notice how the questions moved. Oh, what did that do? On second thought, this layout is not looking so good. Remove the float property from the dot answer selector rule set. Yeah, it doesn't look so good. That's what I was saying. Anyways, Let me see. What did the left do? How elements should behave when they bump into each other on the page. It can take one of the following values. Okay, so the question was touching it on the right, and when we say clear left, the left side of the element will not touch any other element within the same containing element. Oh, so they said that the left side of the question cannot touch the right side. I see. So now we just wanna remove the float on the answer. And yay, we are done. Let's just review this really quick. Since we've reached almost an hour, I'm going to end it with a review. And we're going to finish strong with a review about layout. Great job! In this lesson, you learned how to control the positioning of elements on a web page. Let's review what you've learned so far. The position property allows you to specify the position of an element. The position property allows you to specify the position of an element. The position property allows you to specify the position of an element. The position property allows you to specify the position of an element. Okay, when set to relative, an element's position is relative to its default position on the page. When set to absolute, an element's position is relative to its closest positioned parent element. It can be pinned to any part of the web page, but the element will still move with the rest of the document when the page is scrolled. So what I learned is that it's only relative to the parent that it is in, the most inner parent. So not like a grandparent, but the parent. When set to fixed, an element's position can be pinned to any part of the web page. The element will remain in view no matter what. When set to sticky, an element can stick to a defined offset position when the user scrolls its parent container. So sticky is more like the choice you use when you don't want to use fixed. An element can stick to a defined offset position when the user scrolls its parent container. The z-index specifies the level of an element, specifies how far back or how far forward an element appears on the page when it overlaps other elements. And forward means closer to you, backwards means behind the computer screen. The display property allows you to control how an element flows vertically and horizontally in a document. Inline elements take up as little space as possible, and they cannot have manually adjusted width or height. Block elements take up the width of their container and can have manually adjusted height s. Inline elements take up as little space as possible, and they cannot have manually adjusted width and height. Right. Block element takes up their width of their container and can have manually adjusted height. So inline block has the best of both worlds. Elements can have set width and height, just like how the blocks do, but they can also appear next to each other and do not take up the entire container width, just like inlines do. The float property can move elements as far left or as far right as possible on a web page. far left or far right. You can clear an element's left or right side or both using the clear property. When combined with an understanding of the box model, positioning can create visually appealing web pages. So far, we've focused on adding content in the form of text to a web page. In the next unit, you'll learn how to add and manipulate images to a web page. How to add and manipulate images to a web page. Take some time to experiment with your new knowledge of positioning and style.css. When you're done, proceed to the next unit. You know what? A cheat sheet would be very helpful. Let's look at this cheat sheet. Let's see. I don't know if you have access to this, or is this only for pro accounts? Try it out. Wow, they have cheat sheets for every one of them. I should go over these things in another stream. Okay, well, that's it for this stream. Thank you for running with me, and we'll see you all in the next stream. See you all next time. Don't forget to subscribe to me on YouTube.